If you went to college or maybe even high school and you took a psychology class, Psych 101, do you remember the Rorschach test? Or the ink blot test, right? They put up the ink blot and you'd be like, oh, that looks like my mother-in-law, and she's in a waterfall. I don't know. That right there. That's for me. I don't know. And so it's like an association thing. And I created my own Rorschach test this morning, but instead of visual, it's going to be more verbal. I'm going to give you some words, and I want you to process them and think about like what comes to mind. Is it a good feelings, or it's not going to be good feelings? All right, I'm just setting it up. But is it someone who you see as opposition, or so? Just a couple of words to get us thinking this morning. We'll start off there, and this is for an internal response. Okay, this is not for external response. Just put that disclaimer in there. So internally, just how are you? So we'll start with the easy one. COVID. Climate change. Roe v. Wade. MAGA. The Supreme Court. Elon. I don't know how that makes you feel. The border. College loans. Cancel culture. Pro-life. Planned Parenthood. Trans woman. Republicans. Democrats. Now my blood pressure is going up. All right, just calling out loud, wondering how you responding, like what's going to happen next. Getting unhealthy levels. So take a deep breath. We're gonna explore some ideas today, and I want you to know that my intention is for your good. It is for our good. And when we started out into this sermon series, Political Exiles, the idea was that we could wake up the day after the election, I think it's November 6th, November 5th, and have genuine love for Jesus, a countercultural unity in our church, and a clear and clean conscience about how we cast our vote. Like that, so that is the hope. That's why we are stepping into this uncomfortable conversation. And we have disagreements all the time, things that separate us, people that we get angry with, like my boss, he's too angry, my neighbor's too nosy, my coworker's too talky, and my preacher is too preachy. Watch out. Or they're too old, or they're too young, or we live simple lives, or they're extravagant. We can't keep up with that. We like fresh, organic, non-GMO, carefully coddled, open pasture chickens. They like McDonald's. You know, that's the real divide, right? All these things that divide us, and I think I've covered most topics. And so the title of my talk today is, I say dog, you say chicken. I say dog, you say chicken, meaning we see things differently, and we're often divided and polarized. And there are no shortage of things that divide us in our culture. No shortage. And politics are right at the top. It is right at the top. Just this week, I was having a conversation with a friend, and we were talking about politics over dinner, but it wasn't in an issue kind of way, but more just like the climate of politics in our country. And he's not what I would call a partisan person or like hardline this way, but had real concern about where the divide in our country was taking us. And like, was there any hope to have any type of unity in our country? And here's a startling study. I'll put up this graph so you can take a look. Is that growing numbers of Republicans and growing numbers of Democrats, when asked about the other side, what they think about them, and it's not good, like right off the bat. So, if you can, it's kind of low here. So for example, the blue represents Democrats, red is Republicans, but over here, they believe that 83% of people who vote right are closed-minded. So all across the board, it's pretty, it kind of shifts. But do you think someone on the opposite aisle is dishonest? Yes. Immoral? Yes. Next slide there. It gets better. Unintelligent. Hey, we're in agreement on that one. You know what I'm saying? Red and blue. We both think you're stupid. There's some divergence in. So I read these things. And I'm like, why? Like on the one on closed-minded, okay, I can see why. And then on this one, I don't know, socialism. I don't know why the red. But across the board, 4 or more of these traits. As if I am a Republican, I think that Democrats have, they're immoral, they're dishonest, they're unintelligent. And if I'm a Democrat looking at so that's how we start the conversation in our country. I don't even think we have conversations, actually. Our political, and then we're divided, and then we dehumanize the other side. Because if they're unintelligent, if they're immoral, if they're dishonest, I don't even need to listen. I don't even need to listen to such a person. One pastor put it this way. He said, we've reached the point where the comment section and major newspapers are a greater testament to the depravity of man than all the theologies of the reformers put together. If you're trying to prove that we are a depraved people, just go check out some comments. Just about any topic. We are depraved. In the church, we are not immune to these political divisions. There was a study in 2018 that showed that people are choosing churches based on political positions first. Churchgoers are self-selecting into churches based on their politics. Another study found that very few people attend church services with Christians who hold different political views than them. So this is a tragedy. As we are quicker to identify with political candidates, parties, and positions than we are with other gospel-believing Christians. Our primary identity is now becoming a political lens, and we'll see all right, which Christian group, all right, yeah, I agree with these Christians on politics, they're good. Not those Christians over there. It's not good. It's not good. And I'm not speaking of the Hills Church in particular, but just the church in America. And our ideas are shaped more by the tribes we identify with than the facts that we receive if something is good or bad. Case in point, have you ever watched a sporting event and you're watching with someone who's going for the opposing team? Right? Like say, we love Jesus, so we're Broncos fans, and you're with someone who's still, no, because I know there's some fans of the Chiefs in here who love Jesus. But let's say you're watching said game together, you see the exact same play, and you're Broncos fan, that's a penalty. What's the other person saying? No, it's not a penalty. And this is actually backed up by research. In the 50s, they took college students who were fans of rival teams, and they asked them to watch a game, to count up the number of penalties that they saw and infractions that they saw. And the number one indicator of how they were going to count was not the number of actual penalties. It was about half for their own team compared to the other team. And we do the same thing in politics. Our side, barely wrong. The other side, always wrong. And what this looks like is if you hear a new, not necessarily a new idea, but let's say you hear a bill that's coming before the state house or state senate or on a national level, and you don't know who's put the bill forward. I would guess, because I do this same kind of thing, is that I don't make just based on how I hear it, I want to know who sponsored the bill. And I hear who sponsored it, and I'll be like, if it's my side, okay, I like it. If I find out the other side sponsored it, I'm a little hesitant. I'm just being honest. I don't know if anyone else has ever done such a thing. And so then we're on our tribes and we make decisions based on what our tribe is saying. So we did this I tried this experiment about 6 years ago, and we're gonna try it again. So we're gonna play a game. I don't know if it's gonna be fun or not. And it's like Name That Tune. I'm doing all these games that are like that, but not really. We're gonna try that one more time. So it's like Name That Tune, except there's no song, but there's gonna be some lyrics. And by lyrics, I mean some political comments. I'm not gonna tell you who said the political comment. I just, again, want you in your mind, this is an internal, to think, do I agree with that statement or not? And then I want to tell you who said it. And then you're going to feel bad. That was my intention. I'm just throwing out, playing my cards. We're friends here, being honest. All right. So the first one, we'll put the first one up there. First one. Here we go. We know big government does not have all the answers. We know there's not a program for every problem. We have worked to give the American people a smaller, less bureaucratic government in Washington. And we have to give the American people one that lives within its means. The era of big government is over. Just think about that for a moment. That sounds like balanced budget. If you agree with that, then you agree with former President Bill Clinton. That was former President Bill Clinton. All right, that was easy. That one's not too controversial. Next one. We simply cannot allow people to pour into the United States undetected, undocumented, unchecked, and circumventing the line of people who are waiting patiently, diligently, and lawfully to become immigrants into this country. So this politician was speaking about legal immigration, securing the border, which we're no strangers to immigration and here in our city. So again, internally, if you agree with that, you would agree with former President Obama. That was former President. You're like, yes, I got that one. President Obama. And you know what? I'm doing the opposite. That's what we're doing here. We're doing kind of opposites of what you might think. Here's another one. I believe in the idea of amnesty for those who have put down roots and lived here, even though some time back they may have entered illegally. So this is politicians speaking of the need for amnesty, for immigrants, giving them some roots here, so they can live and make a life, make a family for themselves. If you agree with that, you agree with former President Ronald Reagan. That was who, for a lot of conservatives, is the second coming of Jesus. So I'm just going to throw it out there. The next one is about law and order and rising crime rates. What are we going to do about rising crime rates? Quite frankly, the president's plan is not tough enough, bold enough, or imaginative enough to meet the crisis at hand. The president's plan doesn't include enough police officers to catch the violent thugs, not enough prosecutors to convict them, and not enough judges to sentence them, and not enough prison cells to put them away for a long time. This was current President Joe Biden, before he was president, responding to a State of the Union from a different president. And I understand politicians change their ideas. And, how are we doing out there? Okay? Look at the person next to you, give them a thumbs up, say, you're going to make it. 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 No kidding. Last one. Criminal justice reform. Prison reform. Americans from across the political spectrum can unite around prison reform legislation that will reduce crime while giving our fellow citizens a chance at redemption. So if something happens and they make a mistake, they get a second chance at life. So prison reform, is that a good idea? If so, then you agree with former President Donald Trump. We have been so taken by political ideologies and tribal thinking that we can't even acknowledge when our political opponents have a good idea or do some good work of legislation. We can't even name it for what it is. And then we self-select into these groups and with other people who vote just like us in these echo chambers. And what about us as the Hills Church? And I don't know the political makeup of the Hills Church. I've had conversations around politics with people in the church, and I found it interesting that I have had two people who shared with me very personally that they felt like they were the political minority at the Hills Church. And one in particular said that when conversations came up in microchurch around politics, he didn't feel like he could be truthful about his own ideas for fear of what the others in the group would think. One was pretty liberal. One was pretty conservative, having a feeling like minority at the Hills Church. And part of me, and both of them love Jesus. Both of them have served in leadership here at the Hills Church. And to consider, like that brings me some joy, to be honest with you. Not that they didn't feel like they could share, so there's still some work to be done, but that we have two people from opposing sides feeling some tension here at the Hills Church. I think that is a good thing, and that is where we want to continue to live in this tension. Come on, I'll take a come on that one. We'll take it up. So we talk about being economically diverse, racially diverse church, but we want to be politically diverse as well. And so, like I said, I don't really know, so I thought I would just, if you plan to vote for, raise your... No. We're not ready for that. We're not ready. That's week 4, okay? This is just week 2. That'll be the final week. So what should we do? What should we do? When politics divide us. What should we do in politics? How should we think about this? One option is just be nice. Not talk about politics, not talk about the hard things. Just be nice. Like that is a possible solution. I don't think it's I don't think it's a lasting solution to just pretend like we don't have differences. I do think we should name call. So I guess some niceness or just like what most of our population does, and think the other side is unintelligent and immoral and dishonest. I don't think so. And I do think there are times when probably it's not helpful to engage in political conversations. Right? It's not always a time, it's not always a place. So for example, if you've just met somebody, right? If we're doing the meet and greet on Sunday morning and you're shaking someone's hands like, so hey, who'd you vote for last week? If you haven't established a relationship bridge strong enough to bear the weight of a disagreement, probably not a good person to have a conversation with about politics. If you have the relationship bridge that is built, that is strong enough, that can take some disagreement, that can take some back and forth, then maybe we can have a conversation. But so if you don't have a relationship, if you just met somebody, or if you know somebody who is just, like from previous conversations, you know they don't listen, and they're harsh, and I don't know if you need to have a conversation with that person. To what end? So there might be times to not talk about our disagreements. But big picture, I don't think that's the way forward. I don't think that's the way forward. So what do we do? As Jesus followers, how do we engage in politics, especially when we have differences? So how about this? Let's put our faith ahead of our politics. Now stick with me. That's not all I'm going to say about this. Faith over politics. Our faith should inform and should lead our politics. Not your politics leading your faith. So we're a Christ follower first, and I am a Democrat second. I'm a Christ follower first, and I'm a Republican second. I am a Christ. That is my first identity. But so here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that you need to lay your politics aside, or politics don't matter. I know I've had conversations with some of you and are very passionate about certain political policies and ideas because you are a Jesus follower. That is informing your engagement with the world. And some of you might be thinking, Matthew, I'm so glad you're saying that. Because I know that other side. They're not putting their faith first, because then otherwise they wouldn't be voting like that. So this is really good for that other side to hear what you're saying, to put their faith first. And if we were to take a survey, and do I put Jesus first, or politics first, or I just want to get out of here? Put up the next slide there, Robin. Yeah, there it is. So which one? Jesus first, politics, are we done yet? Some of you are like, I don't know, I'm not voting the other way. I would guess you're going to say Jesus first. You're like, man, that's why I vote the way I do. And this is why we have to be, when we say put our faith first, if you're a Republican, you're like, of course, that's why I vote Republican. Because Jesus was always right. Republicans are right. And so obviously, and Jesus, he called a tax collector to follow him. What's another word for tax collector? Publican. Republican. See, it's not a stretch. And if you're a Democrat, you're like, are you serious right now? Jesus was a healthcare dispensing machine. He was to everything. He didn't charge. Sometimes he gave out free meals. Obviously, Jesus was a Democrat. And how did Jesus come riding into Jerusalem? On a donkey? Huh? Obviously, Jesus is Democrat. And libertarians in here, they're kind of been quiet this whole time. You haven't mentioned libertarians one time, man. What's the second most popular verse in the Bible? You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you freedom, liberty. Paul says, work with your hands and mind your own business. That's what he says in Thessalonians 4. Obviously, God is libertarian. Have I offended everybody? So we want to put it is right and good. We should be thinking about our politics through the lens of our faith. But you can make Jesus say just about anything. When you read, like, oh, obviously Jesus says this, so this is now on my side. And we want Jesus on our side. He didn't come to take sides, he came to take over. Jesus came to take over our allegiance. He's not Republican, he is not Democrat. And when you look at, let's see how much time we got here. All right, a couple more minutes. When we look at Jesus' followers and who he called, he called the tax collector. The tax collector, you might say, was a proponent of big government. And he also called the zealots, the alt-right person to follow who was anti-government and let's burn it all. And I'm not associating Democrats with, what was the first one I said? I lost my, and then everyone who votes right with zealots. I'm just saying there were two opposite groups now. There was two opposite groups then politically that Jesus called, brought them together, and he changed their lives. They were used by God. They were his disciples. They went into all the nations. All the while, I'm still guessing, holding some of their same political ideologies with them. Like they were able to come and follow Christ. They met at the cross. Jesus came for both. So where does that leave us? What can we do if it's not just as simple as, because I don't think it's as simple as putting your faith first, your politics. Because again, you can make Jesus, you can make the Bible say a whole lot of things. But what if a Christian, Jesus-centered view of politics prioritized or made politics about people and not positions? Or the positions that we take have people in mind, and particularly other people, and not ourselves. Like, what is this policy? Is this idea? Is it good for human flourishing? And so, when we say, I think, did he put up there a Christian view of politics? I can never see what's behind. Riley, can you put up the slide that says a Christian view of politics? Prioritizes people over positions. Is the policy good for human flourishing? And I have met people in our church who are sincerely following Jesus, who love their neighbor, who are serving in justice-related ways, whether it's in education, whether it's in housing, whether it's in healthcare, are thinking of other people who are giving of themselves, and some of them vote right. And some of them are going to vote left in this election. And we should continue doing that because we can disagree, and we will and we should on what's best for people, but we cannot disagree that what's best for people is what's best. What's best for people is what's best. So if I were to talk to you tomorrow about this conversation today, that would be what I would hope you would take. When we're talking about politics and policies and positions, thinking about what's best for people. What's best for people is what's best. The problem is that we can no longer distinguish between a principle, value, and political strategy. So if someone has a different political strategy, that we then doubt their values. And we think they're immoral, as I showed earlier. So that's what we have to push back against. Because if someone has a different way of getting to a similar value, we just often discredit them right off the top. We dehumanize them. And I want to just briefly, I'm running out. We might have to make this a two-parter. I'm like, no, let's stop politics next week. Let's wrap it up. So just a couple things. Jesus, when he's asked, and if you've been in church for more than a couple months, you've heard Jesus, when he's asked what the greatest commandment is to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And if you had just stopped with love God, like that gives us a lot of wiggle room, because I can say all kinds of stuff. I can say, yep, I love God, all my heart. And you really can't. You have no way of knowing or questioning. But then if you look at the way I'm loving or not loving my neighbor. So Jesus quickly adds, before the crowd has time when they ask him, what's the most important commandment? Jesus responds with love God, love your neighbor as yourself. Like this is like Christianity 101, but we can't forget it. We can't forget it this political season. We can't forget it when this political season ends, to love our neighbor, to love our politically different neighbor. Jesus would go on to say, so in Matthew 22:37 is where he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. Then verse 39, he says, the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And then he wraps it up in verse 40. He says, all the law. So he's speaking to Jewish people. To them, the law would have been the nearly 600 commands from the Old Testament. It's like all of that summed up. Love God, love your neighbor. It's so simple and so hard at the same time. So very practically, how can we love our neighbors with whom we disagree politically? And I'm going to have the worship team, if they'll come back. That'll help me speed things up if they come up here. But how can we love our neighbors with whom we disagree politically? So I was looking for a picture of people on the right, people on the left who like each other. And I found it a little disheartening that the only time I could find a picture like this was when it was in a news story, because it was so odd. Like families, neighbors, one's voting for Trump, one's voting for Biden, and they're still friends and neighbors. Like that, like the world notices that kind of thing, that kind of love, the love for where else would divide us. So one of the best things, like when we start to feel like we're having a conversation, or maybe you see that Trump bumper sticker, maybe you see that Biden t-shirt, and there's something in you that begins to, like, oh, that person, they just don't know. They just don't know. Like, what if we took a different posture and we became students, more students, fewer critics, more students? That would be my first suggestion to you. And for some of us, this is easier. For some of us, like, you need to write post-it notes everywhere. You need it on your rear view mirror. You need it on your mirror at home in the morning when you're getting ready. Be a student, learn, let's figure out what. So and right along with those lines, with be a student is be curious and listen, which is basically the same thing. Be curious, listen. James 1:19 says, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. And one of the most curious questions you can have is why a reasonable, especially when you're talking with another Jesus follower, another reasonable Jesus follower, how could they have come to this position? Which is completely different than my position. Because usually, when we're talking about positions or candidates, like, we know our background story. Like, we know what has led us to this moment of, like, all right, this is why I'm voting this way. It's because I value this, and I value that. And I had this experience this one time that really was harmful, and so I don't want that to happen to anyone else, so I'm voting here. That's why I'm voting like this. When we look at the other person, they're casting their vote, and it's the opposite vote from ours. We get none of that backstory. All we get is the final product of why they're voting that way. You don't know their history, you don't know their story, you don't know how they were harmed, and so now why they think they're gonna vote this way. Usually we think, oh, they must be an idiot. That is our go-to. And so being curious, listening, asking questions, what led you to that view? Have you always had that view? Tell me your process for getting here. But really seeking to find out how they came to that view, and not in the moment, not worrying about winning the argument. Our identity in Christ is not based on winning the argument. It's based in that we are a daughter, we are a son of the Most High God. And then, so after listening, find some common ground. It's real easy to find uncommon ground. It's real easy to complain about the political landscape in our country. I do it. I get frustrated with the national conversation. I get frustrated with the church. I get frustrated with Christians. That's easy. Staying engaged in the conversation, staying in a micro church where people have different views than I have, that's the hard work. That's where we grow. That's where the tension is. So finding some common ground. And you might find, so which leads me to my fourth suggestion, is to validate values. Validate values. So if there's points of agreement, and it's not so much the policy, but maybe it's you value safety and they're more about freedom. Or you value compassion and they're about personal responsibility. Or they pound the table for opportunity, but you'll raise your voice for equality. And maybe as we talk, we'll find out that, they also value some safety, but maybe it's to a different degree than I value it, or maybe they've got these things in different orders than I have them. Finding some common, and when we find the common ground, validating the common ground. Share your truth, not the truth. We talked a little bit about that last week. And then the last thing, that's how we're going to close, is pray. Pray. Again, it seems like simple Christianity 101. It's nothing. Completely out of the ordinary. Shouldn't be for believers. Paul, he's writing, the Apostle Paul, who was one of the greatest Jesus followers of the first century, took the gospel to nations. He's writing to a mentee that he has. And he says, I urge that petitions, prayers, and intercession. Petitions, prayers, all kinds of prayers. Maybe it's on your knees. Maybe it's fasting. Maybe it's, and thanksgiving be made for all people, for kings and all those in authority, whether it's President Biden, former President Trump, that we may live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness. It's we need to pray. We need to be praying for this church, praying for our micro churches, praying for our city, praying for our nation, praying for our leaders, both local and national, praying for God's wisdom, for the peace of God, the hand of God. We need to pray. We need to pray for one another. So are we going to be the type of people that just follow culture as we continually fracture and go our own ways and just stand on one side and throw these haymakers and put everybody in the same basket and don't think about issues or any nuance? Or are we going to be the type of church, the type of people who are sitting on a hill, who point to the grace of our Savior, who realize, I am a sinner saved by grace, and because I'm a sinner, I might be wrong about this issue. I might not have everything figured out, and so we come to the cross, and every week when we conclude our services, we come to the cross, we come to communion, we come to the Lord's table, because it is a reminder for us to reorient our life, to remind ourselves, I'm a sinner in need of God's grace. I'm a sinner in need of God's grace. That Jesus died for me. He took the punishment that I deserve, but not just for me, but for others, For all who would call on his name, those who vote right, those who vote left. He is their creator. He is their savior as well. We've been called in communion to acknowledge the body of Christ, not just the body that was broken, but the body of Christ, the people, the hands and feet of our Savior.